Young man is humiliated at a luxury party. When he reveals his true identity, everyone is astounded. Thaddeus stepped into the opulent penthouse, his heart racing as the dazzling lights and the sound of laughter enveloped him. The atmosphere felt thick with an air of privilege, a world he had never truly belonged to. He looked around, taking in the polished guests who moved with confidence, their designer outfits shimmering under the glow of the chandeliers. He felt small and out of place in his borrowed suit, which hung awkwardly on his frame. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the whispers began to reach his ears. "Look at him," one woman chuckled, her voice dripping with disdain. "He must have come straight from a thrift store." Thaddeus felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, a mix of anger boiling beneath the surface. Why was he here? What had possessed him to accept this invitation? As he scanned the room, he noticed a group of guests casting furtive glances in his direction, barely concealing their snickers. The laughter stung, each giggle a reminder of his inadequacy. He turned away, seeking solace. The balcony beckoned, a promise of fresh air and a moment away from judgment. But as he stepped outside, he was met with a gaze that pierced through his facade. Serafina stood there, her icy blue eyes locking onto his. For a brief moment, the world inside faded away, and he felt exposed under her scrutiny. She radiated an aura of sophistication that only deepened his sense of discomfort. "You don't belong here, do you?" she remarked, her tone sharp yet curious. Thaddeus swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. "I could say the same about you," he shot back, surprising himself with the boldness of his words. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his defiance. The tension between them crackled in the cool night air. He turned his gaze back to the glittering cityscape, the lights of Manhattan stretching out like a sea of stars. "It's just a party," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Yet, deep down, he knew this gathering was more than that. It was a reminder of everything he had struggled against. Serafina stepped closer, her expression softening. "Is it really just a party? Or is it a reminder of the lives we lead and the masks we wear?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thaddeus felt an unexpected urge to open up, to share the insecurities that plagued him. But before he could respond, the sound of laughter erupted from within the penthouse, pulling him back into the chaos. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure to conform. As he stood there, he realized he had a choice to make. Could he embrace this moment, or would he let their mockery define him? Thaddeus felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. He was more than the suit he wore or the judgment he faced. Perhaps it was time to step away from the shadows and into the light, even if he stumbled along the way. The laughter continued to echo, a cruel reminder of his struggles. Yet, he could also hear an undercurrent of sincerity in Serafina's voice, a hint that she too understood the fear of not fitting in. Could they connect, even in their differences? With a deep breath, he turned back to her, ready to confront not just the crowd inside, but the doubts that had haunted him for too long. "Maybe I don't belong here," he confessed, "but I won't let them decide who I am." Serafina regarded him with a newfound respect, her cold demeanor thawing. "Then perhaps you should show them," she said quietly, a spark of challenge in her words. Thaddeus felt a shift within him, a sense of purpose beginning to take shape. He took one last look at the city before stepping back inside, ready to face whatever awaited him. The night was just beginning, and he was determined to carve out his place in it, no matter the cost. Thaddeus stood awkwardly at the edge of the lively room, trying to blend in with the polished guests swirling around him. He took a deep breath, hoping to muster some courage. The laughter and chatter felt like a distant storm, leaving him feeling small and fragile. He adjusted his borrowed suit, which seemed to hang on him in a way that only highlighted his discomfort. "Hey, look at the lost lamb," a voice called out from a nearby group. Thaddeus turned to see a cluster of guests pointing at him, their laughter ringing in his ears. "What's wrong? Did you forget to read the dress code?" Another chimed in, eliciting more giggles. Thaddeus felt the heat rising in his cheeks. He bit his lip, holding back the urge to retort. Instead, he forced a smile and took a step forward, hoping to change the subject. "So, what's everyone talking about?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. One of the guests, a woman with perfectly styled hair and an icy smile, leaned in closer. "We were just discussing our travel plans for the summer. I'm sure you don't have many of those, do you?" Her words dripped with condescension. Thaddeus's heart sank. "Actually, he began, but the laughter interrupted him again. "Ah, look! He thinks he can talk travel," a man sneered. "You must be as lost as your suit." The words struck Thaddeus like a slap across the face. He felt a swell of shame wash over him, mixing with a rising anger. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. Should he defend himself, or stay silent and endure this humiliation? Thaddeus wrestled with the choice as memories from his childhood flooded back. He recalled the days when he had been the odd one out, never quite fitting in. Those feelings of rejection and loneliness haunted him, and he could feel their weight pressing down. "Thaddeus, right?" A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. It was Serafina, her gaze sharp and piercing. She stood tall, an air of confidence radiating from her. "You seem different from everyone else here." He took a moment to respond, his heart racing. "I guess I'm just not used to places like this," he admitted, feeling vulnerable under her scrutiny. Serafina raised an eyebrow. "Different isn't always bad. Sometimes it's what sets you apart." He wanted to believe her words, but the laughter echoing around them made it hard. "I just feel out of place," he confessed, the honesty slipping out before he could stop it. "Join the club," she replied with a slight smirk. "Most of these people are just playing a part. They're not as confident as they seem." Thaddeus frowned at her words, unsure if he should take comfort in them. "But they definitely look like they belong here," he replied, glancing around at the elegantly dressed guests. "Belonging doesn't always mean fitting in," she said. "It can mean standing out and owning your story, even if it's not what everyone expects." Her words hung in the air, and Thaddeus felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt all night: hope. But doubt quickly crept back in as another voice chimed in from the crowd. "Look, it's the charity case!" someone shouted, and the laughter erupted again. Thaddeus looked down, the sting of their mockery cutting deep. Should he laugh it off, or show them just how wrong they were? He felt torn, caught between the urge to fight back and the instinct to retreat. As he stood there, caught in the tide of ridicule, he realized he had a choice. He could let this moment define him, or he could redefine the moment. The thought lingered in his mind, a small ember of determination igniting within him. "Maybe," he whispered to himself, "just maybe, I can show them who I really am." In that moment, a shift occurred within him. Thaddeus took a deep breath, the noise around him fading into the background. He straightened his shoulders, ready to confront the crowd. It was time to stop being the target and start telling his own story. As the night reached its peak, the air in the penthouse felt charged with energy. Thaddeus stood near the edge of the balcony, the city lights twinkling below like stars fallen to earth. Each laugh and whispered comment from inside the party echoed in his mind, stirring a mix of emotions. But deep within him, something began to shift. A surge of courage started to rise, igniting a spark he had not felt all night. He took a deep breath, his heart racing. The laughter and mockery that had stung him earlier began to fade away. Instead, the thought of revealing his true self took center stage. "What if they knew who I really am?" he whispered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. The idea filled him with both fear and excitement. With a sudden determination, Thaddeus turned and walked back into the party. The crowd was still buzzing with conversation, unaware of the internal battle he had fought moments before. He felt the eyes of the polished guests on him again, but this time he held his head high. "Excuse me, everyone," Thaddeus called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd turned, their eyes narrowing with curiosity. He could feel the weight of their gazes, but he stood firm. "I have something to say." The room fell silent, the laughter dying down as people leaned in closer, intrigued. Thaddeus's heart pounded in his chest, but he pushed through the fear. "You might think you know me," he began, his voice steadying. "But you don't. I'm not just the awkward guy in a borrowed suit. I'm Thaddeus, and I am the heir to a tech empire." Gasps filled the room. The snickers and whispers that had once surrounded him were replaced with disbelief. "Wait, what did he just say?" one guest exclaimed, glancing at another in shock. "I thought he was just some nobody," another voice murmured, confusion etched on their face. Thaddeus felt a rush of adrenaline. For the first time that evening, he felt a sense of power. He continued, "I know I don't fit in here. I know I've been judged based on my appearance and my past. But I want to show you that there's more to me than meets the eye." The guests shifted, their expressions slowly changing from mockery to intrigue. Thaddeus could see them reassessing their previous judgments. The laughter that had once felt like daggers now transformed into a quiet respect. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" A woman in a sleek dress asked, her tone curious rather than dismissive. Thaddeus took a moment to respond, his confidence growing. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid of not being accepted. But I've realized that hiding behind a mask is no way to live." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Thaddeus felt a cathartic release wash over him. The layers of shame that had clung to him throughout the evening began to peel away. He was no longer just an intruder. He was a person with dreams, struggles, and a story worth telling. "Can you tell us more about your tech empire?" another guest asked, genuinely interested now. Thaddeus smiled, the warmth of acceptance wrapping around him. "Of course, my family has been in the tech industry for generations. We focus on sustainable energy and making technology more accessible to everyone. It's not just about profit, it's about making a difference." The crowd listened intently, their previous judgments fading into the background. They were no longer just a group of polished elites. They were people curious about his life and experiences. As he spoke, he noticed Serafina watching him from the back of the room. Her cold demeanor had melted away, replaced by a look of fascination. When their eyes met, a connection sparked between them. Thaddeus felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that he had longed for all evening. "Thank you for listening," Thaddeus concluded, his voice filled with sincerity. "I hope we can all be more open with each other and recognize that we all have our own battles to fight." The applause that followed was genuine, echoing in the once judgmental space. Thaddeus stood tall, knowing he had transformed the narrative of the evening. No longer a pawn in their game, he had become a player in his own story, ready to embrace whatever came next. As the tension in the room began to shift, the guests' faces transformed from mockery to intrigue. Whispers of admiration rippled through the crowd, and the laughter that once echoed with derision faded into a hushed awe. Thaddeus stood at the center of this change, his heart still racing from the revelation he had just shared. It was as if a light had been turned on, illuminating the shadows of judgment that had loomed over him. Serafina, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward. Her previously cold demeanor began to thaw, revealing a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. "I didn't expect that," she said, her voice softer now, filled with curiosity. "You really are the heir to that tech empire?" Thaddeus nodded, still grappling with the new reality of the moment. "I am. I know it's hard to believe. I've spent so much time trying to hide who I am, thinking it would make things easier." Serafina tilted her head, studying him. "Why hide? You should embrace it. You have a story that could inspire others." Her words hung in the air, and Thaddeus felt a warmth surge within him. It was a feeling he had longed for, the acceptance that had eluded him for so long. "I guess I thought people would judge me, like they did before," Thaddeus admitted, his voice steadying. "I wanted to fit in, but I felt more like an outsider." Fitting in is overrated, she replied, her eyes gleaming with understanding. It's hard to be genuine in a world that values appearances over authenticity. I've struggled with that too. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her confession. Really? You seem so confident. Her laughter was light, almost musical. Confidence is just a mask sometimes. I've always felt the pressure to meet certain expectations of beauty, success, and social standing. But inside, I often feel lost. Thaddeus felt a connection forming between them, a bridge built on shared struggles. So, what do you do when you feel that way? He asked, genuinely curious. I try to remind myself that it's okay to be different, she said, her expression growing serious. I want to break free from society's mold, but it's difficult. It's like being trapped in a beautiful cage. Thaddeus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. I've been in that cage too. Tonight I thought I would just be an intruder, but now… He paused, searching for the right words. Now, I feel like I can finally be who I am. Serafina smiled, her demeanor shifting completely. That's the power of authenticity. It invites others to be real too. As they continued to talk, the atmosphere around them lightened. The elite guests, who had once viewed Thaddeus with disdain, now watched with a mix of curiosity and respect. They began to approach him, no longer as adversaries but as seekers of connection. One guest, an older man with a distinguished air, stepped forward. I must say, young man, your courage is commendable. It takes guts to stand up and speak your truth in a room full of critics. Thaddeus felt a swell of pride. Thank you. I think we all wear masks at times, hiding our true selves. But it's liberating to let go of that. Another woman chimed in. I've always admired people who can just be themselves. It's refreshing. The conversation flowed, and Thaddeus found himself at the center of a genuine exchange, discussing not just tech, but the deeper issues of identity and acceptance. He looked at Serafina, who nodded encouragingly. Maybe we should all take a step back and reflect on our own lives, Thaddeus suggested. What does it mean to be ourselves in a world that often tells us who to be? The guests nodded, engaged in his words. Thaddeus realized that the party had transformed from a battleground of judgment into a space where vulnerabilities could be shared. He felt a sense of belonging wash over him, a feeling he had longed for. As the night deepened, Thaddeus and Serafina stood side by side, no longer strangers but allies in their quest for authenticity. For the first time, Thaddeus saw not just the glittering lights and laughter around him, but the potential for real connection amid the superficiality. And for him, that was the greatest victory of all. As the evening wore on, Thaddeus felt a shift inside him. The laughter that once seemed to mock him now felt distant. He stood tall among the polished guests, no longer viewing himself as an intruder. The warmth of acceptance began to fill the space around him, giving him strength. Serafina stood nearby, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. You know, she said, leaning closer, it's refreshing to see someone so real in a place like this. Her voice was soft, but it held a weight that made Thaddeus turn to her. I didn't think I would fit in here at all, he admitted, a hint of vulnerability slipping through. But now, it feels like I belong for the first time. She smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face. You have a unique story. Most people here wouldn't understand that. Thaddeus felt a connection growing between them. What about you? He asked. Do you feel like you belong? Serafina paused, her gaze drifting to the crowd. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just playing a role. Everyone expects me to be perfect, to fit a mold. Her voice was filled with a bittersweet honesty. But it's exhausting. I get that, Thaddeus replied, his heart racing. I spent so long hiding who I am just to fit in. He gestured to the guests, who now watched him with a mix of intrigue and respect. But now, I think it's better to just be myself. Exactly, she nodded, her eyes brightening. It's brave of you to own your truth. Most people won't take that risk. As they spoke, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The elite, who once laughed at Thaddeus, now approached him with genuine interest. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his expression curious. "Can you tell us more about your tech empire?" Thaddeus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their attention. "Sure, it started with my father. He believed in using technology to make lives better, not just for profit. I hope to continue that vision." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I want to create things that help people, not just make money." The man nodded, impressed. "That's a noble goal. It's rare to hear someone speak like that in our circles." Others joined in, asking questions, eager to learn. Thaddeus felt a rush of excitement as he shared his ideas, his passion shining through. "I think we need to focus more on community and less on competition," he explained, his words flowing freely. "Real success is about lifting each other up." Serafina watched him, her expression warm and encouraging. "You're inspiring them, Thaddeus. They're really listening," he grinned, feeling a sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. "I never thought I could connect with them like this." The crowd surged with energy as they began to share their own experiences. "You know," a woman with a bright dress said, stepping forward, "I've always felt pressured to maintain a certain image. Your honesty makes me rethink my choices." Thaddeus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's easy to get lost in what others expect of us, but true happiness comes from being real, even if it's uncomfortable." Another guest chimed in, "I've spent my life chasing status, but it hasn't brought me joy. Maybe it's time to change that." Thaddeus felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. He had come to this party feeling like an outsider, but now he was at the center of a conversation that mattered. The whispers of admiration filled the air, and he could sense the shift in perspective among the elite. "Thank you for sharing your story, Thaddeus," Serafina said softly, her gaze steady. "You've made a real impact tonight." Thaddeus smiled back, grateful. "I think we all have more power than we realize. It just takes one person to start the conversation." As the laughter and chatter continued around them, Thaddeus felt a newfound sense of empowerment. He had transformed from a man hiding in the shadows to someone who embraced his truth. The night had brought unexpected connections, and he understood that belonging was not about status or appearances, but about being true to oneself. In that moment, surrounded by people willing to listen and engage, Thaddeus knew he was no longer just a guest at the party. He was a force of authenticity, ready to face the world with confidence. The party began to wind down, and the laughter that once filled the air faded into soft murmurs. Thaddeus stood in the center of the room, feeling a rush of energy that replaced the nerves he had felt earlier. He looked around, realizing that the glances he received were no longer filled with mockery, but rather curiosity. It was a strange feeling, one that he had never expected from these polished guests. As he stepped away from the crowd, he caught Serafina's eye. She stood near the balcony, her expression thoughtful. He approached her, feeling a sense of camaraderie that had grown between them over the course of the evening. "You were amazing tonight," Serafina said, her voice low but filled with sincerity. "I never thought you would stand up and share that part of yourself." Thaddeus shrugged, a smile creeping onto his face. "I guess I just got tired of hiding. I wanted them to see me, not just the suit." Serafina nodded, her gaze unwavering. "You showed them something real. It's refreshing." He took a moment to absorb her words, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I didn't expect this kind of reaction. I thought they would just laugh at me again." "People change," she replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes one person to be brave for others to follow." As Thaddeus looked out at the city lights that sparkled like stars, he realized how far he had come. Just hours ago, he had felt like a stranger in a world that seemed so far removed from his own. Now, he stood tall, grounded by a truth he had long buried. "Do you ever feel like you're playing a role?" he asked suddenly, turning back to her. "Like you have to live up to what everyone expects?" Serafina's expression shifted, revealing a vulnerability he had not noticed before. "All the time. It's exhausting. I've spent years trying to fit into a mold that isn't me. But tonight, seeing you, it made me think about what really matters. Thaddeus felt a connection forming, deeper than he had anticipated. What matters to you? He asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, collecting her thoughts. I want to be seen for who I am, not just for my family's name or my job. I want to be authentic, like you were tonight. He smiled, feeling a sense of kinship. Then let's both try to be more authentic. No more pretending. Serafina smiled back, her eyes brightening. I'd like that. It's a new journey for both of us. Thaddeus agreed. He felt invigorated by the idea of stepping into a new chapter of his life, one where he could embrace his identity without fear. As he looked back at the gathering, he noticed people still whispering, but this time, it was different. They were not laughing at him, they were discussing what they had witnessed. Look at them, he said, gesturing towards the guests. They're talking about us, not in a bad way. It's as if they're starting to see beyond the surface. Serafina glanced over her shoulder, her expression shifting from contemplation to determination. Maybe they'll learn something from us. Maybe they'll start to question their own definitions of success. Exactly, Thaddeus replied, feeling a sense of purpose. True belonging isn't about fitting in, it's about being true to yourself. As the last of the guests began to trickle out, Thaddeus took a deep breath, savoring the moment. He felt lighter, free from the chains of self-doubt. Are you ready to go? Serafina asked, her voice breaking into his thoughts. Yeah, he said, turning towards the door. I think I am. Ready for whatever comes next. Stepping out into the cool Manhattan night, Thaddeus looked up at the sky. The stars shone brightly above him, a reflection of the newfound confidence he felt within. He realized that his worth was not determined by the opinions of others. It was defined by the acceptance of himself. As he walked away from the opulent penthouse, he felt a sense of hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was his journey, and that made all the difference. Share this story if you believe that authenticity can transform lives and create real connections. Leave a comment about a moment when you chose to be true to yourself and how it changed your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.